Who was the biggest jokester in George Washington's army? Why, it was Lafayette, of course. Moving into the video, changing ways of life. Key concepts. Compare urban to rural society during the 1920s. What is Prohibition and what resulted from it? What was the Great Migration? And then what is the Scopes Trial? How did the differences between science and religion showcase a split in society? Key vocab: Prohibition, speakeasies, bootleggers, rum runners, those terms very much associated with the Roaring Twenties, and then the Scopes Trial. Let's get started with rural and urban life in the 1920s. We'll start with rural life, and life in the countryside is slow paced. It's very traditional. Often you're either selling goods to big markets, cities, or you are living more of a subsistence type of life with your farming. Urbanization has had a big impact. We just noticed it in how crops may be sold or where they might be sold. And then the population is also declining. The cities have been a lot of people have been moving to the cities. And, by 1900, I think the population between rural and urban is something like 50-50, whereas in 1800, 3% of the U.S. population lived in cities. With that said, one of the big aspects of rural life is the traditional ways. That's not the case so much with the urban areas. Very fast-paced lifestyle, lots of competition, especially with so many people coming in from different areas. There's drinking, there's gambling, casual dating is occurring. This is very different from the rural lifestyle and the traditional ways. Many cities are now over 100,000 in population. We just talked about the population growth of cities and how that's taken away from the population in rural life and rural areas. Urban areas are more liberal, and that is really starting to challenge the traditional ways of rural communities. And we're going to see that at play here as we move further into the video. Speaking of people moving from one place to another, this brings up the Great Migration. And the focus of the Great Migration has to do with African Americans. Prior to the Civil War and even after the Civil War, the majority of African Americans live in the southern part of the United States. At this time, we're going to see a large movement of African Americans go from the south to the north. In general, they're looking for a better way of life. More specifically, they're looking to escape some of the problems that have existed for a long time in the South, from racism to plain old looking for better jobs at this point. What do they find in the North? The reception there is plain old not good. Anytime somebody's looking for jobs, people feel like they are at the expense of their jobs, so the reception from the economic standpoint is not good. They're going to encounter heavy racism, and it's going to lead to a number of riots that happen throughout northern cities. This map is a little bit of a visual for you to see where African Americans from the South are leaving and some of the cities they're going to. Let's move into the Roaring Twenties and probably what most people are familiar with regarding the 1920s is the fast-paced lifestyle and Prohibition. So first and foremost, why is Prohibition outlawed? This goes back to the Progressive era. A lot of people felt like alcohol was a source of corruption. They wanted to do something about it. There is a lot of heavy drinking going on. Women lead a charge with the temperance movement. There are organizations like the Anti-Saloon League. They see it as a source of corruption. They want to get rid of it, and they do through the 18th Amendment that is eventually passed. However, because of things like World War I and the Progressive era, where people felt as if they were giving up a lot, sacrificing a lot, well, they want to drink alcohol. So what type of effects does prohibition have? Well, the effects are many. The first thing that's going to happen is many saloons are going to close. They can't distribute the alcohol, sell the alcohol like they used to, so they've got to close down. And when that happens, there are some initial good things that look like it's a really good idea. Arrests are going to go down, and then there are going to be fewer domestic incidences regarding the abuse of alcohol. However, when you shut down saloons, there's a lot of tax money from sales that's not going to be collected anymore. So the lack of tax money that would pay law enforcement to crack down on anything illegal happening is going to go down as well. At the same time, the demand for alcohol has not dipped. People want alcohol just the same as they did before. It's just now they have to get it in different ways, which is going to increase the illegal production of alcohol. And this is what gives way to the infamous organized crime of the 1920s and people like Al Capone. And then they are able to maintain what they do because there's not a very good way of enforcing the law against these gangsters of the 1920s. So there's a need for police that results out of this, but the police demand isn't fulfilled, and speakeasies come into existence, rum runners come into existence, bootleggers come into existence. The gangsters mentioned, Al Capone. By the way, Al Capone makes, I think, on average for a certain number of years, like $60 million per year. It is crazy how much he makes. He's infamous, he's loved in many ways. This is the 1920s. This is often the roaring aspect of the 1920s. But Prohibition, that 18th Amendment, the unforeseen consequences of it are pretty far-reaching. The last item on the docket for this video is the Scopes trial, or what is known as the Scopes monkey trial. Overall, it is a clash between traditional ways of thinking and new modern ways of thinking, and they're challenging. They come to a head here in the Scopes trial. The stages between religion and science and whether or not evolution should be taught in the school system. It is against the law where John Scopes teaches evolution, and even though it's against the law, he does teach it, and that's why he goes to trial. But before that, the American Civil Liberties Union had mentioned that anybody that does teach it will be represented by them if they are indeed arrested. So Scopes goes to trial. He's going to be found guilty. He's fined. Later, the whole thing is overturned on a technicality, and Scopes goes back to teaching. The law remains in effect after that, but a couple of interesting things come out of it. One of the first ones is the outlook on Protestant belief of religion, and that is they have a more literal or fundamental outlook on the Bible. And that gets challenged here when William Jennings Bryan concludes during his testimony that there might be some interpretation of the Bible that's necessary or that happens. That's one thing. Then the second thing, which I started off with, is this overall idea of traditional ways versus new ways. That's at play here, and we see it again with our next video that has to do with the 1920s woman. That's it for today. See you next time.